personality. They borrow their their massing, their street presence, kind of the way their symmetry ultimately derives from classical architecture. They're in denial, but they're still deriving from this classical sense of proportion and symmetry and ratio.
Wow.
And obviously, no, I mean, the Romans inherited the architectural language of the Greeks, the language pioneered by the Greek temple, which is, the orders, Ionic, Doric, Corinthian, all that kind of stuff. But they added to it a new material, which is concrete, and a new sense of how to use interiors. So like the Pantheon, that huge rotunda when you first walk in, that's a very Roman space. The Roman baths with their gargantuan vaults are also typically Roman. Interiors, sweeping massive interiors are a Roman invention in Western architecture. And they're made possible by this material, Roman concrete. It's kind of a geological fluke, Roman concrete. They begin by just making mortar from the local volcanic sand. It's called a pozzolana. And this stuff, for various chemical reasons, happens to make very, very strong mortar, much stronger than traditional lime mortar. And they kind of just stumble this way on concrete. They don't pour it the way that modern concrete is. It's kind of laid in layers, as I mentioned in the last episode, over bits of rubble. But you can vary that rubble, whether it's heavy or light, the what you put in the concrete, to create a hugely flexible and incredibly durable material. It's not reinforced. There's no rebar in ancient concrete. But its compressive strength, just what the loads it can carry, is as strong as good modern concrete. And marine concrete, the stuff that's mixed with seawater for, again, chemical reasons, is almost indestructible. It's incredible. It forms these crazy bonds that make it as harder than many natural rocks. And so the Romans are lucky. They have this material that just the geology of their region makes easy to make. But they use it in very innovative ways, by making things like the Pantheon, this enormous void, this rotunda, crowned by a dome, the largest unreinforced dome ever built, never been excelled. The baths that again have these soaring vaults.
Yeah.
And of course, they build on a scale the Greeks never dreamed of. The aqueducts, Rome's aqueducts stretch for hundreds of miles.
And that was to
to bring in water from the mountains down into the city.
Genius.
It really is incredible. The bridges. I'm doing an episode on bridges on my YouTube channel soon. My question was, could a Roman bridge hold a freight train? And the answer is not quite, but it's close, which is incredible. And they're just building in stone.
Yeah, and a lot of them are still there.
And a lot of them are still there.
Yeah.
When I was in Turkey once, I drove my car over a little Roman bridge in the middle of nowhere. And it was built in the first century AD, never repaired. But the stones fit in so neatly, and it was all still fully intact, and it carried my car like it was nothing.
Yeah, I can't remember. God, it's been a while since I lived there, but like some of those little bridges from Trastevere.
Yeah. In Rome, there's still a couple ancient bridges.
Yeah, I think a couple of them are ancient, and then a lot of them have been refortified. Like the one from Castel Sant'Angelo,
yes,
that goes over to Piazza Navona. That's not from zero.
It actually is. But
they fixed that.
It's been repaired a number of times.
That's what I mean.
But the piers are all from the 2nd century.
That's impressive, at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that some of that could last. So I got to see that video. We can put that out.
Oh, yeah. Well, stay tuned.
That's going to be cool. Which, again, link in description. You got to check out Toldinstone's YouTube. It's fucking awesome. If you're interested in any of this, trust me. You got a lot there, and your podcast is excellent. I was listening on Spotify. Do you put that on YouTube at all?
I do on the Toldinstone Footnotes channel, which is sort of the subsidiary channel, because my normal subscribers don't usually care for the long-form stuff, so I kind of hive it off.
Well, that's idiotic. Start watching the long-form stuff. It's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, and the guest list on there is nuts.
Yes, I've been very lucky. There's some great scholars who've appeared.
Yeah, it pays to be in that space, for sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, in the middle of all this, where they're making this beautiful stuff, well, two things here, actually. Like, if you look at New York, where I have the skyline here on the wall, there's so much beautiful architecture that's happened over the years, and there's certain parts of it that are inspired, as we already said in the last episode, by Rome. I remember walking by the Federal Reserve for the first time, and then living in Rome and walking down the street towards where I lived, which I forget the goddamn name of that, but it's a main stretch that goes from Piazza del Popolo up past the Vatican, and the same fortifications on the sides of the buildings or what you see for the Federal Reserve. So it's a real thing. But like, it kind of saddens me with some of modern architecture. I'm not one of these like get off my lawn people where it's all bad, but some of modern architecture focuses too much on like being plain, that it feels like we don't make a lot of shit that's like objectively beautiful and creatively beautiful anymore. Like when you look at buildings in Rome that are from antiquity and back then, like they have these amazing sculptures in them. They have literal works of art, and there's buildings in New York that certainly have that. And now we're doing less of that. Do you think that that's like society kind of losing its personality a little bit?
It's just a whole different way of thinking about architecture. You know, until 100 years ago, there was only one way to build a monumental, impressive building in America or Western Europe, and that was to quote, in some sense, either medieval architecture, Gothic primarily, or the ancient world, in some more or less direct way. But then, of course, after World War II, we adopted the international style, which is no ornament, just big glass boxes. And I'm from Chicago, which is kind of the home of that, or
Couldn't
one
tell.
of the homes. Yeah, right.
Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago. These guys. But anyway, however, even those buildings, which seem so stripped and so devoid of personality, they borrow their massing, their street presence, kind of the way their symmetry ultimately derives from classical architecture. They're in denial, but they're still deriving from this classical sense of proportion and symmetry and ratio.
Wow.
And obviously, a modern hyper-tall skyscraper has a different sort of function. It's a different kind of thing. They're appealing to a clientele that wants the newest, the hippest, the most modern-looking building, and they pitch it accordingly. And they want it to look like it's facing into the future. That's why they kind of disregard these classical details and flourishes. But look hard enough, it's almost always there. Not always. Obviously, we have new technologies the Romans couldn't dream of, being able to build things 1,500 feet up, and hang a skeleton of glass and metal on it. But I think that almost everywhere you look in architecture, it's such an ingrained way of thinking about how buildings are supposed to look that it's there in the background.
Yeah, what was the thing in the Pantheon again? I haven't stood in there in a long time, but there's like the hole at the top of the dome, and when it rains, it falls in a weird spot. What's that again?
That's the oculus, the eye in the center of the dome, and it's there for structural reasons. So
Pull up the Pantheon, Alessi.
So it does, light the whole area. It's the only window in the whole place besides the door itself. But it's the most dangerous part of the dome, the part that would be hanging almost flat in the middle. So by leaving it out, they got rid of what would have been the hardest part to pour of the concrete. It also allows them to build a kind of a compression ring around the edge of that oculus. Yeah, there it is, of course.
It's so beautiful, man.
I was there in a rainstorm once. That was really cool. It's like the column of water falling down.
Yeah. I remember it falls in a weird.
It's kind of there's like air currents inside. It kind of almost spirals.
Yeah.
If it's like a lighter rain.
There's a spot I was telling you a bit offline, but for people listening, because obviously they weren't listening to us offline, but this is not that far from Piazza Navona, which is a very famous piazza within Rome. But when I lived there, a really good friend of mine owns a bar called La Botticella, which is about, if you're coming from Castel Sant'Angelo and you're walking into the piazza, the first alley on the right side, if you go down that maybe like 40 yards on the left, is this bar. Maybe you can pull this up. Let's shout out Giovanni Alessi. Type in La Botticella, Botticella, La Botticella, Rome. But I was joking. It's called Steelers Bar as a joke because Giovanni, from age 4 to 15, moved to Toronto. So he talks with a Canadian accent, but his whole family's from Italy. So he opened up this bar in Rome, and it's almost like that has the feel of that bar in The Godfather that Vitelli owns and everything, like beautiful hole in the wall, and kind of feels like it's from antiquity in some ways. But Giovanni, who's my homie, I send people through there all the time, because if you're going to Rome and this amazing historical place, someone like you know where a lot of shit is, obviously. Like you're literally a historian, but he's lived there for most of his life, and he'll send people to all the off beaten path places that have like insane history, like nuggets that he just knows as someone who's from there. So if you're going through Rome and need like a free tour guide or something, stop by Touchdown Jesus on the bar with the Steelers helmet, talk to Giovanni and tell him Julian Soprano sent you, and you'll be taken care of. Had to make sure I got that plug in for him. But, I remember like he would teach me about some of these different places, not just like the Pantheon, which is like extremely famous, but some of the other architecture in that area and like the little things they would do like from a scientific engineering perspective. And it's just like, I can't believe they even could solve some of these problems, 2,000 years ago. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite factoids that he may have shared with you is that the Trevi Fountain is fed by a Roman aqueduct that's been flowing continuously since the reign of Augustus. Yeah, that the Aqua Virgo, it's been going since 10 BC. So all that water gushing out in the Trevi Fountain is coming through a Roman aqueduct tunnel, even now.
Whoa.
So all these continuities in Rome you talked about, how there's just layers on layers. That's a great example.
Watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.